Hello and welcome back to our tutorial. So in our last tutorial we had a character who could turn using mouse input. We could move forward terribly slowly, and we could, on proximity, we could open a door which we can barely fit through, and then we can navigate our house. Yes, let's speed this character up a tiny bit. So, oops, that was 0.3, so let's go 0.1. Oh, 0.1. 0.1. There we go. And let's see if we're a bit faster now. We are much faster. Very good. That'll make things easier in a minute. So what we want to explore in this tutorial is two things. One is kind of a use of game logic and variables, Boolean variables, so kind of true-false variables. We're going to create what's called a Nav Mesh, and we are going to basically make a non-player character and make it look like it has some sort of artificial intelligence, when in fact it's just following a few simple commands. So let's add a few items to our game. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to create an empty, and I'm going to call this T1 for target 1, and I'm going to go Shift D and put this over here and call this T2. So I'm going to make a non-player character, which is going to be a cube. There's my cube, and I'm going to rename this non-player character NPC. And what we want to do is we want this character to move between these 2 points on a sort of like a patrol. So let's go do that. So I'm going to scale this character down a little bit so we have fewer problems going through doorways, and then I'm going to apply that scale. So I should turn on my keys. That was Control A to apply all sorts of things, but to apply scale. Now, to get this character to go between these 2 points, I can do that a number of ways. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a thing called a Nav Mesh. Now, what's a Nav Mesh? A Nav Mesh is an additional mesh, an additional game object that is a plane or a number of planes, and they will determine where this character can move. So if the Nav Mesh was a plane that was, the shape of the floor of this room, then this character can move anywhere at once inside the room. But once it would get to the edge of the Nav Mesh, so the doorway, it couldn't go any further. So a Nav Mesh is like a boundary, and it determines where the character can move. Okay, so let's set up a Nav Mesh. Now, in our example here, our walls are not complete, so I need to go back in here using my background image, which I have turned off, I believe, and go and delete doorways, and there it is there, I made it bigger. So yeah, I need to go in and kind of amend this a little bit, but I'm not going to do that now. We're just going to keep it simple, and we can always go back and tweak it. So let's set up this Nav Mesh. Now we're going to do this slightly out of sequence, and normally what I would do at this point is I would texture these objects, and you'll see why in a minute, because I'm going to join this object to the floor just to make it a single object, just to make this process a bit easier. So to do that, I'm going to go Control J, and now the floor and the walls are one object, and that's going to make the next bit a bit easier. Okay, so let's make a Nav Mesh. Now how do we do that? Well, we go to the scene settings, and we go down this little panel here called Nav Mesh in the properties window, and it's got a whole bunch of settings in it. But the thing that we're most interested in is this one, this big button here, Build Nav Mesh. So I'm just going to click it, and then we'll explore some of these settings. So Build Nav Mesh, and then suddenly, wow, we've got lots of stuff, and if we go into solid mode, it's even more interesting because it's got all sorts of colors. So basically all these parts of the nav mesh determine where the character can move. So you'll notice there is no nav meshes on top of the walls, so the character can't walk on top of the walls. There are no nav meshes going through walls. So basically this character can walk where it is here in the room, down this corridor, through an open door, and around some of these areas. It can't, for example, go in here because this nav mesh and this nav mesh are not connected. And nav meshes can be edited just like any other mesh, so I can go into edit mode. I can right click here and go L, and they are linked, so it's gonna, I might be able to delete all of that if I wanted. I can select this bit here, this island, L, I delete them, hit X and delete vertices. So you can go in and I can make, if the character found traversing this doorway difficult, I could select it and make it a bit skinnier on X, so that I could make it easier for the character to get around. Or I could redefine where, like I could say, I don't want this character to be able to move into the corner of this room, so I'll move this out. Maybe there's a piece of furniture there, or maybe you just want your character to be able to hide, or all sorts of reasons why you might want to do that. Okay, so this nav mesh is a nav mesh, and it is by default called Nav Mesh, but you can rename it anything you want. Now, how do we use that? Well, this is my character here. Well, let's have a look at this character's game logic. So there's an actuator called a steering brick, and the steering brick asks you for a nav mesh. So what area can the character navigate? So we will select our nav mesh, and then it's saying, give us a target or a target object. So we will use T1. Now we need an input for this, so just for demonstration purposes I'm going to say always and link the two of these together. Now, there's a bunch of other settings here and for the nav mesh that we haven't looked at, but I just want to show it to you in operation. So this is T1 and this is T2, so we've told it to navigate to T1. Okay, so let's hit P for the game engine, and we can't see him. Very good. So we'll go into wireframe mode, hit P, and off he goes. So let's move where this object is. Let's go G and place this here. So the character's going to have to not go straight towards the wall. It's going to negotiate around the wall. Now that's exactly what we didn't want it to do. So it's gone through the wall and not try to navigate as the nav mesh might select or suggest, the name might suggest. It's just gone straight through. So why has it done that? Well, first of all, it's a static object, so we need to make it dynamic. If I do that and now I hit P, when I get to the wall section, it will still try and go through the wall, but it won't be able to. It has physics. We should give it a box collider. But more importantly, why is it not following this new nav mesh that we've put in here? And that's because we've told it to seek, and what we need to do now is we need to say follow path. So now let's hit P. So now it has a completely different behavior. So it's using the nav mesh to create a new path to find the character or the target. So let's look at that again. Let's go seek and hit P. So when we hit seek, it's going directly to the object, and there's times when that will be exactly what we want it to do. And then if we wanted to exhibit a more higher level of intelligence, shall we say, and negotiate its way around the walls, we'll change to path following and hit P. So that's our first sort of installment for this. This is how do we get an object to follow another object, and that's how we do it. So let's take our target here and move it back into our room. Now what we want to do is now explore a little bit of logic, a little bit of game logic. So my input now is always. So, you know, I'm always going to go after this, and when I reach it, then what do I do? So let's remove the always as an input, and let's see if we can come up with a more interesting alternative. And before we do that, actually, let's just have a quick look through these settings. So we've got path following, which we're using now, target and nav mesh. A relaxed distance, so this is when I've reached the target. When do I stop moving? Because I've got a velocity of 3, acceleration of 3, and a turn speed. So when it gets within 1 unit of its target, it will stop moving. Now we are using a default cube, so it's 2 units wide by default. So if we had the other cube was the object that we were trying to follow, it would actually never stop. It would keep pushing the cube because it couldn't get to a distance of 1 unit away. So we have to be careful about this. Also, you can, in terms of gameplay, you can do quite interesting things. If you wanted the character who, or a non-player character who would run towards your character and then at a certain distance stop and then fire, so not get up close because they were using a distance weapon, then you might have this quite a large number. So it would pursue your character for a certain amount or through a certain distance and then change its behavior. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add in a logic brick, a variable, and we're going to make the variable a boolean, so it can be true or false, and we will call this march. Okay, so we'll march from one point to the other. So we're going to say when the property march is true, then walk towards target 1. And very simply then we'll say when the property march is false, we're going to duplicate this steering brick. So we'll say path following, and we're going to, instead of having T1 as the target, we're going to say T2 and use the Nav Mesh, and we'll leave all the other so now we have a very simple setup. So if it's true, go to this object, and if it's false, go to that object. And now we're going to say on collision, and collision with what? Well, let's say we'll call this path with a capital P. So on collision with an object that has the property path, what we're going to do is we want to take our property and we want to toggle it. And what property do we want to toggle? Well, march. We want to toggle it, and toggle is basically like a switch. It goes from true to false. If it's true, it'll turn to false. If it's false, it'll turn to true. So let's just save that before we play. So we'll go save as, we'll call it game stage 4 for consistency. So let's just walk through that. So if it's true, we'll go to number 1. If it's false, we'll go to number 2. And if we collide with something with the property path, we will toggle the true or false. Okay, so all we need to do now is give this a property called path, and then give this guy the same property, path. So now let's press P. So we're going to property number 2, and we have stopped. Let's have a little think about why we've done that. So we have said on this guy here, we've said on collision, and an empty by default has no collision. So let's make it static, and let's do the same with this empty here. We'll make it static, and then we'll go P. So now we can have collision with the object. Oh, we need to make it an actor as well. I'll do the same over here, and we'll give it a collision bounds of a box, and we'll do the same with this one here, collision bounds box, and hit P. So now we should be able to collide with that object, and then we will turn and go back to the other one, and when we collide with that, so we'll just ping pong through these. Now we could make this a little bit more complex and add in a third point, and at that point, if we were adding in a third sort of path for the object to follow, we may not use a boolean. We might use an integer and say, if it's got a value of 1, go to this object. If it's got a value of 2, go to this object. If it's got a value of 3, go to the third object, and then we can return to a value of 1 after we've hit that one. So it's possible to make quite a complex path for your non-player character to follow, and as it reaches one point, then it'll turn and go to the next one. Yeah, I actually just point out the actor didn't make a difference there. It was adding the collision bands that made a difference. So so that works, and that's all perfectly fine and good. So now we want to add in one more level of complexity. What we want to do is we want to have, when our character enters into this wonderful simple world, to disrupt it. And how do we do that? So let's go back to this non-player character and have a look at the logic. So what we want to do is we want to say when the character gets near. How near? Well, let's say a distance of 5 units. So when I get within a distance of 5 units, then I want to use steering, path following. I'm going to pursue the player, and the Nav Mesh is going to be our Nav Mesh. Okay, we can connect these together. And again, I can be very specific if I have more than one player. So if I'm near with a distance of 5, then follow the player. Now let's just see if that works, and we'll talk about all of the possibilities available to us. So I'm going to come here through my door, and now my non-player character is pursuing me. Interestingly, I can lead them astray. What's happening is I've got a reset distance here, and the reset distance is 2. So basically, when I get more than 2 units away from the character, from the non-player character, it's resetting itself, and it's going back to this behavior. So let's increase this reset distance to say 4. And this is basically my escape velocity. If I can move faster than this character, so let's reduce its velocity when it's following the character to 2, and we may have to increase our character's velocity to be able to run away. So we go through, we get within a distance of 5, it's going to pursue us, and then if we get far enough away, it will go back to its path, and if not, it will follow us. Oh, too far. So long as we stay on the Nav Mesh. And if I had an area where there was no Nav Mesh, then it would do what it's doing now. Well, actually, within range, it would stay at the edge and try and pursue me. But once it had gone out of range, again it would go back to the previous behavior. So where are we? We are 20 minutes in. So I'm going to stop our tutorial at this. So this is Nav Meshes. Now I said at the beginning I'd go back and have a look at some of the properties of the Nav Mesh. So let's have a quick look at that. When we create the Nav Mesh, there's a whole range of things that are going on. One of the major issues that you'll come across is scale. So you have here cell size, and these are basically how big each of these individual pieces are, and you can increase and decrease the cell size to make the Nav Mesh more or less detailed, or more or less able to go into smaller places. You can also change things like, so for example, max slope is 45 degrees. If this is all completely flat, but if I had a terrain that was had a hill on it, for example, and I wanted the non-player character to reach the bottom of the hill and not be able to climb up it, then I could increase the max slope to a number higher than the incline of the hill. So if the hill is at 30 degrees, and I said, well, don't let it go up 30 degrees, the maximum it can do is 25 degrees, then it would reach the bottom of that slope and then stop. So there's a number of very kind of useful tools at our disposal here, and we'll come back and explore these in more detail another day. Today we're just looking at sort of basic functionality. So we'll leave that at that. So we've got a character that can pass from between objects, so be on a path, and then that kind of patrol is interrupted through the proximity of our player character. We can be pursued by the player character, and then we can get out of range, and then the non-player character will return to its path. Okay, so if we can get that to work, we'll be doing well.